Hello everybody and welcome to the Global Schools Festival. If you're watching this live, then you can put any comments you have or questions in the chat box and we will answer them on the day. My name's Emily Hurd and I'm one of the publishers at Cambridge English. I'm delighted to be here today with Michael Tomlinson. Michael is an English teacher and a best-selling children's textbooks author, writing for Cambridge University Press and Assessment. He's best known for co-creating the much-loved children's series Kids Box and Power Up, Level Up and Life Adventures. His stories feature characters like Monty Mouse and Trevor Troll and Cameron the Cat, who have found fans in classrooms around the world. Most recently, he's been working on a brand new course for very young learners called Pippa and Pop. Thank you very much for joining me, Michael.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, I say a pleasure to be here. I mean, I've been here in my house for a couple of years now without really getting how much, but it's a pleasure to join you at the Global Schools event.
Great. Well, we're going to have a bit of a chat about stories and humour and teaching English in general. Stories are a really central part to the books that you write for teaching English. So we'll come on to the books you've written in a minute. But first of all, I wanted to ask you a bit more generally about stories for children. So first of all, we wondered if you have a favourite children's story, maybe from your own childhood or maybe from reading to your own children when they were younger.
Yeah, I think thinking back to my own childhood is probably a little too far to go. So
no, surely not.
Referring more to the books I used to read with my kids, I thought of two or three, some of which you may know. The first one was a story called Gorgeous. Have you heard of Gorgeous?
I don't think I have.
It's about the evolution, the language evolution of a young baby zebra with her mother. And it starts off with a mother saying, gorgeous. So little baby Zeb goes, gorgeous. Mother says, tip top. Baby says, tip top. And then we go through, baby gets lost and meets a lion. So a bit scared, but says to the lion, gorgeous, tip top. And the big scary lion goes all soft and enjoys playing with the baby Zeb until the mother comes along, scares the lion away. And then the little baby zebra learns about what is danger and what isn't. It's a lovely story. That was one of the first ones. Another story I enjoyed reading with both of my children when they were young is the Very Hungry Caterpillar.
Oh yes,
which
classic.
I think is a classic. Great storyline. I love the repetition, the counting, and the evolution and the transformational process. And then thinking about stories for slightly older children, I used to love reading Tintin to the kids.
Okay.
Funny stories, it goes on forever, but also lots of opportunities for putting on voices. You know, Captain Haddock doing a blistering barnacle, all of that sort of thing. I used to enjoy that. And even today, Paolo, my eldest, who's now, I don't read him stories anymore. He's a little bit old for that, but he
never too old.
Remember those moments.
That's nice.
Do you have what about you? Do you have?
We do a lot of stories in my household, and currently the theme is magic. So there's a lot of Harry Potter, obviously. But before that, we really enjoyed reading The Worst Witch, the whole series of The Worst Witch. Have you read those?
I haven't, no.
Oh, well, I do recommend them. They're quite old. I think they were written in the 1970s, but you wouldn't really know it because they're set in this magical world. But they're very sweet and less scary than Harry Potter. So yeah. Quite a nice introduction to that kind of book. So we've enjoyed those. But we enjoy a bit of everything, to be honest. It's nice to have variety, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what do you think makes a good story? What makes for a good
well,
one?
I think it's varies according to the age range of the children you're reading to, but there are several elements which are almost universal. You need to have a good storyline, which takes you from A to B, going through various places with a couple of twists along the way, something you're not expecting.
Yeah.
I think characterization is very important. They don't necessarily need to be fully rounded 3D characters, but something that the kids can latch onto, and it helps them with their sort of to relate emotionally to the characters, not just in terms of
Absolutely.
intellect.
Yeah.
With stories for the younger kids, the visuals are very important. The first thing that will catch a child's eye when they open a book is what they see, what the pictures are, bright, cheerful, but maybe slightly unconventional at times. There's something a bit different, makes a big difference.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the success of The Very Hungry Caterpillar. Eric Carle's amazing designs are a really big part of that, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why the book I had when I read it to them was the sort of the little card book. The small
we have that.
Which is also, it's interactive. So you put your fingers into the holes, and he has another book with the spiders where you trace the web, which that with young kids, I think it's very important that they have that tactile, touchy-feely element with the reading, that it's not just a cerebral activity, that they actually get physically involved. There's interaction. And humor, going back to the previous question, humor as well, something that makes you laugh, makes you smile. You don't need to laugh around, roll around on the floor, but bring a smile to the face. I think makes everything a little bit more attractive to both the child and the parent, or the child and the teacher.
Yeah. Why do you think stories are so important for children? Why do we have this emphasis on stories and storytelling as part of our culture, do you think?
Good point. It's something that's been going on for years, for hundreds of years, thousands of years, hasn't it?
Since time began, yeah.
Absolutely. I suppose going back in time, it was one way of remembering things, passing things on. And it's with children, it's also definitely one way for them to interpret reality, interpret the world around them, that they don't necessarily understand or absorb the information if you set them rules. But if you give them a parable or a story that contextualizes something for them in a way that they can understand, then it does sink in. And stories, there's also the thing about repetition. Kids will be quite happy to hear a story 5 times, 10 times, or 100 times. You know, I remember, I'm sure yourself as a parent, you'll have had this situation where your child asks to be read the same story that you've been reading the last 10 evenings. And you think, well, you know the story, but that's the thing. They already know it. But each time they get a little bit more out of it. I think that's really important. And it's true for parents learning, parents with children at home. And it's also true in the classroom, I think, as well, that we know from the way that learners process language that they learn big chunks of language, and then they work out what's happening with that as they progress through the learning process. So yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's really something in that about using stories are an important way for helping all of us, actually, but children especially, to kind of process their understanding of the world, and almost to do sort of like a dress rehearsal for what might happen to them, you know, in real life too. I often think about it when thinking about kind of resilience and life skills, and how much easier it is to talk to children about persevering with something difficult if you can relate it to a story that they know or a character that they respond really well to, because then it's not so abstract. Yeah.
And it's also, it's also less threatening, isn't it?
Yeah.
What you were saying about The Worst Witch, that it introduces those themes in a less scary way. Well, in this, that relates to most children's literature, is that we're dealing with topics which, in another context, would frighten children. They might not even be interested in. But if they're using a story, if we're using a story, then they can relate to that without feeling any kind of nervousness or fear or whatever.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to talk about your textbooks for children, your very successful textbooks, which obviously have these characters in them, which we know that teachers and students have kind of really fallen in love with. I'm really interested to know what inspires you when you're writing those kind of stories.
Okay. Well, I suppose this is the moment for a big shout out to Caroline Nixon.
Of course.
You know, Caroline, she's incredibly creative and is a constant source of ideas. So very often she will have an idea for a story or a storyline or for a character, and from that nugget we'll then fill it out. Probably the first place we start is with a context and some characters. So for Kids Box, we started off thinking about the family and their toy characters, and then we try to develop traits within that as the book develops or as the storyline develops, and then we will hone it down to each individual page, episode, whatever, and think about what language we're using. And then often we relate it to things that have happened to us in our own lives, or things that have happened with our children, with our friends' children, or even at the school. So it's sort of based in our reality, but with a bit of imagination, which is so often brought by Caroline and creativity.
I'm trying to reconcile Trevor Troll eating crayons with your reality, but if you say so.
Yeah, having breakfast. So.
Okay. That's great. Obviously, I'm sure it's not always plain sailing. What kind of challenges do you encounter when you're creating materials for this young age group?
Well, I suppose there are various things that you always want to keep in mind, aren't there? You want to make sure that whatever the story is, you're engaging the children, that they're interested in what's happening, what's going on, that it's on their level. You know, I think there's a danger to think first about the language and then try and fit that into what you can do with children. It needs to be on their level so that they can relate right from the beginning. It's important to get a little bit of humour in. Obviously, there is the question of language, because you can't use language which they haven't seen before. That question also depends on, or for us, has always depended on how we're using the stories and the characters within the books, because sometimes there will be areas which are for presenting new language to the kids, in which case you focus very, very strongly on that, and try to get as much exposure of that as you can. There are others which are aimed primarily at recycling the language. So they're the idea is for them to enjoy the language with absolutely no stress of thinking, oh, I don't know. They've seen it all before, so they can just enjoy the story and relate to the story. So depending on what the objective is, we have slightly different ways of attacking it. But you say there are challenges. I mean, I think there's more joy and advantages to teaching the young group than the challenges. I'm writing for them. you can be playful, you can have fun, you don't have to be over serious about what you're putting on the page. And that, I think, is at the core of any successful writing for young learners.
Yes, absolutely agree with that. And I think this point about engagement's really interesting. And you've mentioned the sort of playfulness that is central to the way you approach teaching and writing as well.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, lots of the characters in the books are very funny. Is there a role, or what role do you think humour has in learning? And why do you think it's important that learning is playful, and perhaps language learning in particular, actually?
Playfulness or play especially in the very young learner classroom is, I think it's essential. That I've read a paper published by the Language Research Department at Cambridge by Delia, I think it is.
Yes, one of our white papers is dedicated to this topic of learning through play, which is available to everybody.
Yeah, it's a great read. There's sounds like I'm plugging it. That wasn't my intention. But the whole thing about creativity and children being able to experiment with things with no fear of making mistakes.
Yeah.
Experiment both physically, with language, and socially. I mean, it works on so many different levels, the idea of playfulness. And it is at the core to any learning, is this willingness to try things out,
to take risks,
making mistakes, because we've all been in a situation where you start getting nervous about making a mistake, then you end up not doing it or not saying it, and that's a huge mistake with young children. They really need to have fun. In particular with language, I think it's probably even more important on so many different levels. Within a classroom, the idea of a classroom dynamic, whereby we're interconnecting with the other students. To do that, you need to be relaxed and to be comfortable with the people around you. And one of the best ways of creating that relaxed atmosphere is if you can have a laugh. If they can laugh about themselves, about their mistakes, laugh together with everyone else. Obviously, you have to be careful that they're not laughing at anybody. That is always going to be negative. But we want to create a positive atmosphere where students are relaxed but alert. That relaxed alertness that Krashen spoke about. Playfulness is a great way to prepare them for this, I think.
Yeah.
So there's motivation as well. If they laugh, they enjoy it, want to come back, want some more. There are questions of memory. It helps them to remember things.
Yeah, definitely.
Stimulates the brain, oxygen, all of endorphins. It works on so many different levels. And I think it is for me. It's one of the most important things when teaching English. And probably one area I haven't mentioned is that the way that if the teacher is enjoying the language, the story, the book, or whatever, is the way that you sort of pass on the passion that you have to your students. Because I think personally, I think language is a wonderful thing. It's there to connect with other people, enjoy their company, have a laugh, and learn. And if you can pass that passion that I share, and I think language teachers in general share, then you're halfway towards engaging the whoever is in front of you, be it other teachers or be it students themselves.
Yes, absolutely.
Makes sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, we talk a lot about freedom to fail, and I think that's exactly what this is, isn't it? Like having losing any inhibitions about getting it wrong. I think that's so important to language learning, and something that as adults we really struggle with, but children still have that that willingness. I mean, I remember from my teaching days a student who didn't know the word for a stem of a plant coming up with this incredibly creative sort of workaround where they called it a flower stick. And I knew exactly what she meant. And I think that's exactly the kind of thing that babies and toddlers do, but then we kind of lose, don't we? But when learning a language, it's really, really important, really, really useful, because it's all about communication and meaning, ultimately, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Meaning.
Talking about that adult learning experience, I don't know about you, but a few years ago, I went back to trying to learn a language.
Oh, did you?
I did.
Which language?
Chinese.
Yeah.
Not enormously successful, I'm afraid. My failings more than anything else, but it made me much more aware of the importance of the atmosphere in the classroom dynamics, the way you relate to the other students, the way you relate to the teacher. And I forgot just how terrifying it can be to have to speak up in front of 20 other students learning the same thing as you, when you always think that they know a bit more than you do and they're going to so it is really important to get that classroom dynamic, and the one that I'm relaxed enough so that I can laugh at myself, and if other people smile at me, then that's a positive thing and not a negative thing. And a teacher encourages that, who gives students the freedom to express themselves and come up with their flower sticks, I think makes
yes,
it's different.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, good for you for starting a new language, though. That's very impressive. I think I would really struggle at this point to do that.
I mean, so I recommend it to anyone. You know, because we often, as teachers, on a personal level, it was great. I really enjoyed it. But as a teacher and a materials writer, it was a definite eye opener.
Yes.
What it sort of brought, all the theory was all in my head, and it rang bells, and I agreed with what I had thought before, but it gave me such a visual scenario to exemplify what I had thought before.
So let's come back to the idea of classroom situation and young learners. I imagine that you're a very good storyteller, and thinking about a teacher in that kind of scenario, are there any tips that you would give on how to share stories with children?
Okay, well, I think a couple of the points I've probably touched on before already. The first is the transmitting enthusiasm to the learners. You know, I remember when I first started teaching young kids and I had to read a story, I was a little bit nervous, and so I didn't throw myself into it with perhaps all the enthusiasm I could have done. And I realized that with time, it really is essential that you enjoy the story with your children. And so putting on voices, doesn't matter if the voices are good or bad, you just need to get stuck in there. The same as singing. It doesn't matter if you're a good singer or a bad singer. What you need is enthusiasm. That's what the children are going to react to. So I think enthusiasm is very good, very important. I also think it's important that we give the children, especially, I mean, the younger the learners are, the more important it is, an opportunity to interact with the story, which is where the joy of big books comes in, or puppets. I think are another really useful way for getting young learners involved in the stories. A puppet that represents a character. It can be useful when you read the story, and also for following up, doing things afterwards. They're talking to the same character they know. And sometimes with the really small kids, before they can actually read on the page, the going through the routine of using a big book just to get them into the idea of turning pages, going from left to right, top to bottom. Those basic routines are important for later on. In fact, I remember when my two children were very small, before Pablo could really learn, before he could really read properly, him reading a story to his sister, just going through it, passing the page.
Wow.
He didn't know how to read, but he sort of made the story up as he went. But those things stick with young kids, you know?
Yes, absolutely.
And the whole thing about having the right atmosphere for the story. So at home, often stories are read before bedtime. Well, you're not going to put children to sleep, well, to sleep in the classroom, hopefully. But possibly a cozy corner where they can sit down on cushions or whatever, to break from the main story, the main class time.
Yeah.
As well as routines, that they know what's coming and what's expected of them. I think all of those elements, in whatever combination suits each teacher the best they can, all of those are useful. What do you have any extras there, or?
I agree with everything you're saying, and I think this idea of learning being about enjoyment and sharing your enjoyment is huge, because I think as adults we can get really preoccupied with this idea that learning's really important for that reading's really important for children's learning outcomes, because it's going to improve their progress in all subjects, and of course that's true, but I think the more we fixate on that, the more we take the fun out of it, because I also think that learning, that reading is a goal in itself, you know. So I think focusing on enjoyment and you know, a real sort of love of the books, and sharing, you know, those conversations about what are you reading, this is what I'm reading, can really help foster that sort of you know, love of books. I wondered if there's anything else that you could suggest to encourage a kind of love of reading more generally, or indeed a love of language, actually.
One thing which is key, but we don't always focus on, is just availability of books.
Yes, absolutely.
If there's a school library, or even a small class library, possibly with, depending on what age group we're talking about, but with 10 minutes where children can come up, choose the book they want to, and read for 10 minutes. And then, depending on what the limitations are, they can come back to that story later in the week, or if they could take it home, then that's you know, I mean, it's a luxury. Not everybody can permit their schools to have those sorts of resources, but yeah, access to books, I think, is key to everything. And the freedom of choice is also important, if it's possible. You know, I think everybody feels empowered by being able to take choices, and I mean, the research on this is enormous, as well, as you well know, that where you can choose, you're much happier with what you're doing. And if you're happy doing it, you'll do it more, and you'll do it better.
Yes.
So if we can give them that choice, then I think that makes an important difference.
Absolutely. And we were saying books, but really, I think we need to be thinking broader than that, don't we? Because it could be non-fiction just as much as fiction. Certainly it could be magazines or comics or joke books, or, you know, because it's all reading. And I think, again, as adults, it's very tempting to be a bit sort of snobby about good books and bad books, or good reading material and bad reading material. But of course, that's not true. You know, it's all reading, it's all building those reading skills. And I think we need to be quite open-minded about it.
The thing about doing things on the level of the children you're teaching. It's finding out what they're interested in first, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Once you find out what they're interested in, then you can direct what you're doing towards that, so you get these connections. Obviously, in a class of 30, 40 children, or however many there may be, you will get lots of different interests, but you can work out which ones you can cater for in the class, which ones you can suggest things for outside the class, and try to include as many of those interests as you possibly can. That's got to be the aims.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
let everybody play with that variety and that choice.
Thinking about the availability of books, I don't know if this has been the case where you are in Spain, but in the UK, I've really noticed a lot of book swaps springing up. So places where people can leave a book and take a book. And I've also noticed that just among the people I know, lots of people kind of consciously arranging to swap books with other families with children, so that there's this constant flow of books, even in the event that libraries are closed. And I wonder if that's something that schools could do, or that teachers could arrange with parents in school situations as well. Because I absolutely agree that having that choice is hugely valuable. Yeah.
It's a lovely idea. I haven't seen that much of it here. You need lots of sanitizing spray these days.
Lots and lots of sanitizer, or you can quarantine the books. Yes. But it's a nice idea.
It certainly is. Yeah. No, great idea.
We should talk about the impact of the last kind of 18 months or so, because obviously the challenges of the pandemic have really tested the whole school community and really affected many families. I'm just wondering if you have ideas for how we could help young students through such uncertain times, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's not easy, is it? I think the two sort of, possibly because of my training, but the two areas that I thought most about during this period is on the one hand, the poor kids who really should be in social situations to have their education, because that's what it's all about, and the poor teachers who have been asked to do 5 times as much work.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily receiving any of the praise and thanks they deserve. So yeah, difficult times. My hat I take off to all of those teachers who've done such a good job. Congratulations. Well done. Yeah. Going back to your question specifically, what we can do to help children. Well, I think there's one area that you touched on earlier, which is resilience. We need to foster resilience as much as possible. Again, that's an area where humour comes in, being able to laugh things off, working on optimism, positivism, as much as possible, and allowing children to express their emotions. I think that not shutting, if there's a problem, don't shut it away, don't shut it down. As teachers, occasionally we might not want to go there. You think, oh, I'm not sure where this conversation is going, I don't want to get involved. But I think it's universal. We've seen this everywhere, that the problems, psychological problems, the depression, etc., that children have suffered has grown. I think I had the figure of by 25%, which is enormous, isn't it? It's so many children who have really had problems. So by fostering the right kind of environment in the classroom and being willing to listen to children, to have those conversations, to offer support, just probably doing more of the same, probably what most teachers do anyway, but not cutting children off from the conversation, and to make sure that where children are back in the classroom, that we work on the classroom dynamic again, because having been shut away for such a long time, then it's easy to forget what's acceptable, what isn't acceptable. So doing the kind of activities that help them work together, I think is always going to be positive. But I don't necessarily think there are any easy answers to what we should be doing, or any right answers. But following that sort of teacher instinct, where again, it isn't an instinct, it's something you've spent years and years training how you do it. But working on that, I suppose, is key to getting a successful classroom back and giving children all the support they need and deserve.
Yes, absolutely. Well, let's end on a positive. Right. I know that you collect jokes to share with your learners and teachers as well. So I was wondering if you've got any for me today.
Right. Well, as you do know, Emily, jokes. My jokes are not new jokes. They're sort of dad jokes, I think, is what they call them. So a couple of my terrible jokes, which you may have heard before. I'm sure you've heard before. Which part of the dog smells best?
I could guess. Is it the nose?
It is indeed.
Yay!
That's a classic, isn't it? Now, this one. What action is that?
And that's a wave.
Yeah, and that?
I don't know.
It's a microwave.
I like that. That's good. That's excellent. Yeah.
Okay, it's not the first time I've told that joke, but
the old ones are the best. Definitely.
Come on then. Have you got one to share?
I've got, yes. Okay, I can do one. What do you call a sheep on a trampoline?
A sheep on a trampoline. Am I allowed to guess?
Go on then.
Is that, well, hold on. Is it the same name that you give when you cross a sheep with a kangaroo? What do you get?
Oh, yes, it is. Probably a woolly jumper.
Woolly jumper.
Yes. Yay! I've learned a new one.
2 for the price of 1.
That's excellent. And I have one other that I like for young kids because of the language, which is, why was 6 afraid of 7?
Why was 6 afraid of 7?
Because 7, 8, 9.
Yeah. That's yes, I do like those jokes with puns. I think
yes,
are always
absolutely. Simple puns.
And that's going back to what we said earlier. It's the playing with language, making children aware that language isn't just a book. It's something that's alive and you can play with, you can have fun, and they can do it from the age of 6 or 3 or 9 all the way through. That take that with them along their language learning journey. I think that should be the takeaway of our little chat.
Yes, I'm hoping that everyone in the comments is going to write their favourite jokes, and we're going to have this long list of jokes to add to our repertoire. That would be great.
Should be looking in.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. Let's leave it there. It's been great to talk to you.
It's been a pleasure, Emily. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.